Hello, I'm Laura Hanks, the Superintendent of Greencastle Antrim School District, and I was delighted at the opportunity to talk a little bit about differentiation. I know my window of time is small, and you really could discuss differentiation for hours and hours and days and weeks, so I'll try to keep it really brief and right to the point using some really important material from the past and the present. The more we learn about students and their needs, the better we can differentiate instruction for them. So the main question is, what do I see differentiation being in a general classroom setting? And there are some really key hallmarks to differentiation and how you know right away if it's being done well. And it's almost seamless in a classroom. And it really does begin with thinking about what needs to be differentiated for students and how you even go about addressing differentiation. And it really begins with how well you know your students and the environment that's been established in the classroom. I'm going to go back to Carol Ann Tomlinson, who is well known for her work in differentiation, and really talks in this book here, Leading and Managing a Differentiated Classroom. It has some outstanding points in it. But mainly it's about looking at the learning structure, the time on task for students in order to learn well, and the materials that are being used. All of those things can be easily differentiated for students. But it boils down really to the community that you establish in your classroom, and you create an environment where students recognize in themselves that everyone needs something different, and that we have to be flexible in that, because for every skill, the needs might be different among students, but even within a child themselves, in areas they succeed, in other areas where they may need additional help. Another important piece is knowing exactly what the learning goals are in the classroom and learning targets. This book is outstanding. Connie Moss and Susan Burkhart. Learning targets really are different than learning objectives. And when you look at the trajectory of where you need to get students in their learning targets create these points along that trajectory that says students need to know these things. This is where I can statements came from, because learning targets are written from the perspective of the students and what the needs are in a particular lesson. So it's, what is it at the end of a lesson that students need to be able to do or know, so that they can move along that trajectory of learning. So a differentiated classroom has very clear learning targets, and the students are engaged in creating those and understanding those targets so that it's their learning goal and their learning target for that particular lesson, and that they understand how that target plays out in the longer trajectory of learning. One that's a little bit less known perhaps is about learning personalized, the evolution of a contemporary classroom, and talking about how we engage students in setting their own learning goals or learning targets, or where they are and understanding themselves as learners, but then also how much involvement students have in designing the assessments in the classroom, or being part of the task, and what the task is going to be, and how they themselves can manipulate the materials. That's really advanced differentiation when the kids are involved just as much. Goes back to Carol Ann Tomlinson, though, is that the community in the classroom has to be designed as a community of learners who recognize how they can support each other and how they can maximize their strengths to address their weaknesses. And finally, the flexibly grouped classroom. This is a little bit more modern. It's newly published, but that flexible grouping in the classroom is a hallmark of differentiation. And it really does mean that you can group kids in all different ways depending on the task and the needs of the students. One of the quotes in here I'm going to read directly is that the groups tend to innovate faster, see mistakes more quickly, and find better solutions to problems than individuals do. And that's old research brought into here that talks about when you work in a group, you can be more effective, but you can also be more efficient in instructional design when it's planned carefully and students are grouped carefully in the classroom, and those groupings may change from one unit to another unit depending on the learning targets and the needs of the students. Increased instructional efficiency comes out, building community, resetting attention, increasing motivation, all of these things that flexible grouping helps in a classroom. And so we so often plan instruction where this is your group and you're in the red group and you're in that group all year perhaps, and that there's no ability to move in between that group, whereas a flexibly grouped classroom shifts and moves depending on the learning targets and the needs of the students. And so a differentiated classroom is really like stepping into a community of learners. And it's really hard to identify on any given day who's struggling with what and who's the expert, because those experts can change readily. And that's an environment you want to create in your classroom. So to summarize real quickly, differentiation means that to be able to do it well, you have to know exactly who your students are, what their interests are, and what their needs are, and setting goals that align to the larger trajectory of learning, and understanding that to reach these goals, we don't differentiate the goal, we don't differentiate the expectation, we differentiate the support, the time, the learning structure, the materials, possibly even the assessments, but really bringing those students in is part of that process to be a true community. So hope I answered the question well, and I'm always happy to discuss instructional programs, plans, implementation at any time. So thanks for the opportunity.